Free cards are great. Lots of free cards that tick off our opponents are even more great. How's it going, guys? Suris here. Unfortunately for you, but fortunately for me that you stumbled on my channel. We have to talk about something kind of important before we get into today's commander, and that is that for the longest time, for my oldest videos, I was using TCG player pricing for my stuff. And then, of course, after the union busting incident, I moved over to using Mana Pool for practically everything. Now, this has a lot of upsides. In my opinion, they have a better optimizer. They're a more ethical company since they weren't, bought by eBay, but there is one slight problem. Sometimes, because the vendors on Mana Pool are not the same as the vendors on TCG Player, they don't have a full cross-contamination yet, there are fewer options available on Mana Pool, which means sometimes cards end up being a little more expensive. There's also something that I do not see on TCG Player, but I do see on Mana Pool, and that is the bulk minimum. So, on Mana Pool, cards have a bulk price minimum of 15 cents. So if we pop over to Singularity Rupture here, it's a 15-cent card. Now, is there maybe a cheaper version on TCG Player? Who knows? But if you look at Blitzball, Fractured Power Stone, Honored Heirloom, Arbiter of Woe, all of these cards have a 15-cent minimum. And this is not something that I noticed initially when I was putting decks together and swapped over to Mana Pool pricing. Because of this, there's been a bit of a struggle in trying to get decks that work as well for $15 when I don't have access to the 1 to 15 cent cards that were available in bulk bins on TCG Player. So I've made a decision. $15 decks are no longer going to be $15 decks. They are going to be $20 decks. And the reason for that is to allow for there to be some flexibility with this 15-cent minimum. Now, if you ignore basic lands, which I know take up an amount of a deck, if I were to use only the lowest bottom of the barrel bulk cards for every single card in every single slot, with this 15-cent minimum, a $15 deck could only be made by only using bulk cards. If I'm making a 3-color deck, those decks are often made with only 2 or 3 of every basic lands. So that allows me only $14. $1 of playroom is not enough to make something that I am confident in showing all of you. I don't want budget players to just play a budget deck because it is cheap. I want budget players to play a budget deck because it's fun and it works and it's cheap. In order for me to make decks that are going to still be usable and still be fun to play against your friends, I need to have that little bit of extra flexibility. So for now, these are going to be $20 decks. If that price minimum changes at some point on Mana Pool, maybe that will change things. But I think this lets us marry everything together on the channel completely. So now, when you see a deck of mine that you want to pick up, you can go to buy deck, click on Mana Pool, buy now, and then all you have to do is pop over to any video of mine, and before picking up your stuff on Mana Pool, just click on the Mana Pool link, and that link will allow it to be a deck that you purchase through me, so I get a kickback on that. You end up supporting the channel if you're going to be picking up the cards anyway, whether it be sealed product or whether it be loose product to make a commander deck. If you do that, it helps me a ton, and I want to thank you for doing so. Now that we're done with all that housekeeping, Dard Rothair, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Please fix my pronunciation in the comment section below. Why did I say please? I was saying pronunciation and please at the same time, and now I'm mixing up my words. I really need to not do this when I first wake up, but says video 6 of asking for a review on Satoru, Umezawa, or Yenit, or other black color cheater. I need big black creatures on my board. My biggest problem is cutting the deck. I find so many cards that does all the same, but it's always a nightmare to choose what goes in and what goes out. See aristocrats. How many cards do I put in that have sack outlets? How many cards should be the things that create other cards, etc.? How many draw, ramp, interaction, and everything else should I have in it? Okay, cool. I appreciate this comment, Dard. I really, really do. I think that the commander we're going to be working with is going to be Satoru Umezawa, because he's going to showcase exactly what we should be looking for in a deck. And what better way to showcase this than by doing the deck profile, as I normally do, but this time explaining a little bit more about the numbers and how we come to what we have. So, let's get right into it. As I said, today's commander is Satoru Umezawa. He's a 3-mana 2/4 commander that says whenever you activate a ninjutsu ability, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This only happens once per turn. Then, it also says that each creature in your hand has ninjutsu for 4 mana. So, what does this commander tell us? Well, he tells us that we can run creatures of whatever expense we want, because we can throw those creatures onto the board for 4 mana. He also tells us that our deck needs to be made a majority with cards that have flying, or skulk, or shadow, or unblockable. Now, do those things alone give us enough information to build a deck? Kinda, sorta, but he does give us a little more information on top of that. He has a draw engine on top of this, so instead of going for 10 to 12 draw spells, we could go for 8 to 10 draw spells because our commander is taking up one of those draw slots. Now, if we had a higher budget, then Umezawa would be able to be far more powerful because we'd have access to Lightning Greaves so that we could very quickly get creatures in and punching and out again. But at our budget, we don't have access to that. At our budget, we only really have access to the Swiftfoot Boots. Now, we do have more cards that give protection for Umezawa, but we want the boots because this gives protection and haste. We also want Lightning Greaves because it gives that, but we don't have access to the Lightning Greaves. So we're looking for evasive creatures. We can go lower on draw spells. We want protection where we can find it, and we want big creatures that do things when they come out. Now, for our creatures that come out and, get onto the board with this effect, there are 2 templates we can look at. Creatures that come out and have a high impact because of their obscene numbers, like Triplicate Titan, and creatures that come out and have a lot of impact because of their obscene effects, like Sepulchre Primordial. Now, as for me, I favor the cards with the obscene effects. As far as I'm concerned, combat damage is a thing that will happen naturally in our games, so trying to get more combat damage is a loser's game. If we are playing our game correctly, we should be getting that in general. So, I would not be using cards like Triplicate Titan in this deck. You can use them, there's nothing wrong with them, but I'm personally not going to be running them in our version. Now, there's another reason for this, and that reason is, well, the way our deck is set up, one of the things that you asked about was that the deck needs a certain number of every type of card, removal, draw, etc. So what's the best way to get the right amount of cards that do removal and draw? Put simply, it's to consolidate your removal, draw, and other abilities onto cards that synergize with your deck. For instance, I know that cards like Feed the Swarm are good because they have the ability to blow up a lot of different types of cards, but if I fill this deck up with cards like Feed the Swarm, then we're not going to be able to get anywhere. You still should run this to give your deck the flexibility to kill enchantments, but you should not be relying only on cards like Feed the Swarm. Cards like Dalek Drone, Overseer of the Damned, Archfiend of Depravity, these are all removal pieces that offer you an evasive creature, so they do what the deck wants to do. They are high-cost creatures that come down with Umezawa. They do everything that Umezawa wants, while also filling in the slot of removal. Likewise, making sure our draw section has cards like Thought Monitor, Ultimecia, and Muldrifter means that when we're drawing cards, we're still using evasive creatures, or we are using creatures that benefit from having our commander's ability to cheat them out and benefit from the other evasive creatures on our board altogether. Combining these together, it means we get to consolidate what our deck needs into a handful of packages so that we will have a deck that is bursting from the seams with everything that it needs synergy-wise. Instead of just having 10 generic draw spells and 12 generic removal spells, we have 10 draw spells that all care about what our commander wants. We have a bunch of removal spells that care about what our commander wants. This helps us consolidate our slots down so that we only get the cream of the crop. As for the first important area of our deck, we are going to be talking about unblockable creatures, the creatures that are going to make their way in so that Satoru can get his trigger. And we're going to begin with the Thousand-Faced Shadow. It's a 1/1 with flying that's hard to block, has ninjutsu on its own, and if it enters from the hand, if it's attacking, it makes a token copy of another creature we control. This can get out of hand very quickly. We're also running the Troll of Khazad-dûm, Gloomfang Mauler, and Shardless Outlander as creatures that are hard for our opponents to justify blocking, while also being creatures that can get us the lands we need out of the deck so that we never get mana screwed. Then for our basic unblockables, we have Vidalcan Infiltrator, Veteran Ice Climber, Slitherblade, Mistcloaked Herald, Triton Shorestalker, River Sneak, Grey Harbor Merfolk, and Tormented Soul. All of these are effectively vanilla creatures that cannot be blocked and allow our commander to do his thing. Then we have Shoreline Looter, Looter Ilkor, and Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel. These are all unblockables that, if we choose to hit with them, will allow us to loot through our deck. Decide whether or not you need to be swapping your cards out when you have access to these. Sometimes their only job is to just get you more cards so that we have a better hand. Then we have Cunning Evasion in the unlikely event that our opponent has creatures out that are very hard for us to maneuver around. The Cunning Evasion can be used to bump them back into our hand in case our opponents do end up blocking them. This is also super helpful when we have cards like the Troll or Shardless Outlander on the board, when we no longer need them to be doing their thing and we just want to cycle them away for lands to thin our deck out. This gives us the ability to do so. The reason that we are going to be using 16 cards for this is something called the cube theory, or the 8x8 theory. The basic idea behind the theory is that if you run 8 of every card that does a certain type of thing in your deck, you will be likely to hit that card, and you will be able to have a deck that is synergistic and fun. Obviously, this theory assumes you're going to have 8 draw, 8 ramp, and other areas. I think that that is a fine starting position, and that's all the theory is for. It is for a starting position for your deck. To figure out how likely it is for us to get those cards, though, we can use Salubrious Snail's Hypergeometric Calculator. So, if we have 8 cards in our deck that do the thing, in this case are unblockable, and we only need 1 to start our deck off, and we only need it by turn 3 because we have a turn 4 commander with Umezawa, he comes down turn 3, his effect is live turn 4, then how likely are we to get that card? And the likelihood is 58% with 8 cards. So what if instead we were running 16 of those cards? Though really it's closer to 13 because a couple of those are big boys that cannot trigger Umezawa. That gives us a 77% chance to have what we need to make the deck function early on. And this means that our deck will almost always have what it needs. If only in a quarter of your games are you not getting what you need, well, that's fine. Those are reasonable odds. But this is also why it's so important to consolidate space where you can. We have 16 unblockable creatures, but we don't have 16 giant creatures to come down, despite them being just as important. We have a bunch of creatures that come down in other categories. Now, we do have 4 creatures that do not fit into the removal or the draw categories that are in here, but they are here because they are tempo swinging haymakers for our deck. Diluvian Primordial and Sepulchre Primordial both come down off our commander's ability and are both very evasive creatures, and both force us to get a bunch of free resources from our opponents. Scion of Darkness steals 1 creature from our opponents, and Mind Leech Mass steals a card from our opponent's hands. All of these cards are very, very strong and swing the game in our favor, but we don't need 16 of these, because if we had 16 of these, then our deck would no longer be functional, not when it comes to trying to stop our opponents from killing us. We would need to build a deck that is stronger than our opponents, and that would often require a lot of money. We don't need that if we are running a lot of removal so that we can bring our opponent's deck's powers down to what we have available to us. And there's another way that we can bring our opponent's dex powers down to what we have available to us, and that is by eking out every ounce of advantage from our cards as humanly possible. So we are running a small reanimation and recursion engine. Not a lot. We are not a reanimator deck, but this is another way to cheat out big dudes onto the board. And as such, I've only chosen cards that reanimate more than one thing at once. So we have Ever After, which reanimates 2 creatures and then goes back into our deck. Coiling Rebirth, which reanimates a creature and then clones it. Victimize, which reanimates 2 creatures at the cost of one of our creatures. And Archpriest of Shadows, which reanimates a creature when it deals combat damage to a player and also allows another creature to reanimate something if it deals combat damage to a player. So, ideally, we swing our creature at an opponent. We have 2 creatures on the board swinging. We say one is they're both unblockable. We swap one of the unblockables out for the Archpriest of Shadows. Archpriest of Shadows gives its backup ability to the other unblocked creature, and then we get to revive 2 creatures at once. By doing this, we get to have a deck that has the ability to respond to having its own stuff taken out far better. We're not trying to get particular game pieces back. We are just trying to be able to get back up after being knocked down. We are a budget deck, so we expect to be knocked down. And that does it for the core strategy of the deck. Now let's talk about draw so we can get into how we're going to power through what we have. Now, normally, I would like to have 10 to 12 pieces of raw draw power, but because Umezawa does not need that, because he himself has the ability to dig through the deck, we actually can run just 9 pieces of draw. Now, remember, some of our other unblockable creatures have draw attached to them, but I'm not going to count them because if Umezawa's working correctly, those creatures don't make face with our opponents, and therefore will not draw us cards. But the creatures that will draw us cards, we have 10 of them. I've already talked about Ultimecia Temporal Threat. She comes down, and anytime a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. But we're also running Recon Mission, Coastal Piracy, and Bident of Thassa. All of these do the exact same thing. When our creatures punch our opponent, we get to draw a card. But we're also going to be running Thought Monitor and Mole Drifter. When they come down, we draw 2 cards, and they are evasive flyers, so we can pop them back into our hand to reuse them over and over again ad nauseum. We have Arbiter of Woe to force all of our opponents to sack a creature or to discard a card, and then we draw a card, and we also burn our opponents when we do so. Arbiter of Woe also has flying, so he's able to swap around very easily. Then we have Thalkanos Seer, and we have the Satoru the Infiltrator. Both of these are able to dodge a handful of creatures, and both of them draw cards whenever cards either pop on the field for free, or in the Seer's case, if it ever leaves the board. If the Seer leaves our board, then we get to immediately draw a card. That's just perfect for us. Then we have Sphinx of the Second Sun, a flyer that allows us to get an extra beginning phase at the end of the turn. This allows us extra mana to hold up for counter spells, and this allows us to set up for subsequent turns way, way better by greedily using all of our mana now and then holding it up for a follow-up turn. It also draws us an extra card, which is just great. Now we got to talk about removing our opponent's shit. As we are a budget deck, then we do need to lean into the control aspects of the game to slow our opponents down to our level. And one of the best ways to do that is with counter spells. Sinister Sabotage and Refute can counter a spell while also throwing a card into our graveyard for our small reanimation package. Negate and Essence Scatter can both get rid of creatures and non-creature styled spells on the stack, which can help us out a ton. And Resculpt and Feed the Swarm can be used to get rid of artifacts, creatures, and enchantments as we need to remove them. Dauntless Scrapbot can be used to get rid of our opponent's graveyards, and it also allows us to get a lander token for ramp, which is super helpful. Then we have the cards that all come down because of our evasive cards. If one of our evasive cards punches our opponents, then we spawn a Meteor Golem, and this one has guns. Meteor Golem's one of my favorite cards because when your deck lacks the color combinations to get rid of certain cards, Meteor Golem comes in and says he's able to get rid of anything. Then we have one of my favorites, Dusk Mangler forces our opponents to sack a creature, discard a card, and lose 4 life. Then we have Gormond, forces all opponents to sacrifice a creature, and it's got flying, so it's able to do the evasive thing. Overseer of the Dam gets rid of a creature and spawns tokens for us, also has flying. Archfiend forces our opponents to sack creatures until they only have 2 left, and of course, it's got flying. Voracious Fellbeast is another evasive creature that forces our opponents to lose a lot of creatures and gives us food for all the ones that we get rid of. Vile Mutilator comes down, and it's got Flample, and it also makes our opponent sacrifice 1 creature and 1 enchantment at the same time. Then, well, not at the same time, but you know what I mean. Then we have Patron of the Vein, a flyer that blows up a creature when it comes out. Dalek Drone, a flyer that blows up a creature when it comes out. Noxious Gearhulk, a menacer that blows up a creature when it comes out. And Breaker of Armies, which comes down doing 10 damage, but can then be used to force our opponents to block it with everything they can use to block. So if we're fighting like a dragon player who's got a lot of flyers, use Breaker of Armies to keep those flyers well and away from your little dudes so that you can get in there still. And while the Breaker is a pseudo board wipe, we're going to run Singularity Rupture and Necromantic Selection. The Selection is here because it destroys all creatures and then leaves us with 1. And the Singularity Rupture is here because it causes untoward psychic damage to players who think Mill is a viable win con. So, that's all for removal. Let's move into mana. Since our deck is based on cheating cards into play, we're only going to be running a 6-card ramp package, not counting the lander token stuff that we have access to. So we have the 2 mana rocks of Charcoal Diamond and Sky Diamond and Fractured Power Stone, a 1 mana Wayfarer's Bauble because it's great to have access to lands, Ornithopter of Paradise because it is a ramp piece that can trigger our commander, and Honored Heirloom because it is a ramp piece that gets rid of cards in our opponent's graveyards, which can completely cripple Clan Neltoth players. Did I say Clarin? Marin of Clan Neltoth. There we go. Those are words. Then for lands, we are running 12 swamps and 11 islands, with our dual lands being the untapped Tainted Isle, Choked Estuary, Command Tower, River of Tears, Darkwater Catacombs, Exotic Orchard, and Sunken Hollow, with our tapped lands being Fetid Pool, so we can get rid of it if we mana flood, and Temple of Deceit, so that we can scry early. Our fetching lands are the Ramping Myriad Landscape, Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, and an Ash Barrens, and then we have 2 utility lands, a Rogue's Passage, so that we can get creatures in there when our opponents have the ability to block them still, and Pit of Offerings as yet a 3rd way to get rid of problematic cards from our opponent's graveyard. With all that said, hopefully I explained why we are picking the cards for the slots that we did, how we consolidated the slots the way that we did. Now all that's left to do is to show you how to play the deck. Alrighty, looking at our opening hand, we have a Vile Mutilator and a Breaker of Armies as our big boys. We have 2 lands with Swamp and Island and an Ornithopter of Paradise. We have some ramp and a Tormented Soul. Honestly, this is a really good opener hand, and I'm okay keeping it. Let's go ahead and play a Swamp, tap it for the soul, and then pass to our opponents. Next turn, we get to play an Island, tap out, and get Ornithopter of Paradise on board. We go into the next turn, and we play a Swamp, tap 3, and get Satoru Umezawa out on the board ready to go. And for the next turn, we've missed a land drop, but we can swing with Tormented Soul, and then put him back into our hand to put the Vile Mutilator out, which will make our opponents lose a lot of resources really early. And then Umezawa lets us look at the top cards of our deck, put this Swamp into our hand so we didn't really miss the land drop, and throw these into the grave or into the bottom of the deck. Then we get to play the Tormented Soul so we have access to it for the next turn. Moving into said next turn, we have Tormented Soul, Ornithopter of Paradise in hand, and I think what I want is to start clearing my opponent's board out a lot. So we're going to do our swing in, and then we're going to go ahead and do the Umezawa Swapsies, and the Umezawa Swapsies is going to throw the soul back into our hand for the Breaker of Armies. So somebody's taking 16 damage right now, and then Umezawa is going to get us our next card. It's a land because we keep missing land drops, so we're going to go ahead and get that here, and then we get to play the land. So the reason that we are getting the Breaker of Armies is to keep our opponent's boards nice and clear. If this is out early, our opponents are going to struggle to keep a board state. And if they kill it, we have not 1, but 2 ways to reanimate cards in our graveyard. We're in a very, very good spot. But for now, let's play the Tormented Soul and pass to our opponents. Moving into the next turn, we have Satoru, the Infiltrator. We have a couple of options here. So we don't have anything in our hand that we can drop down that will help us. So what we need to do is we need to pay all of our mana to get Satoru out and get Reconnaissance Mission out. As much as I would like, maybe not even Satoru. Maybe not Satoru. So, actually, yes, Satoru. Yes, Satoru. Because we can't do the Swifties yet. So we're doing this because we need access to more cardboard. We need more big dudes in our hand to do their job. So we're going to swing out with our creatures, and the Breaker of Armies is going to be forced to be blocked. So we're going to be able to hit with 1, 2 creatures to draw 2 cards. That gives us an Arbiter of Woe, a perfect card for a follow-up turn, which we're going to do right now. Temple of Deceit comes down. It sees an island up top. I want to not miss my land drops, so I'm okay with that island being there. But we have lots of draw we're going to get, so I can throw the island away. I can safely throw the island away. So now we're going to swing in with the Vile Mutilator, the Breaker of Armies, the Tormented Soul, and we don't have enough mana to use Umezawa twice, so we're just going to swing like that. If the Umezawa can go at whatever opponent that the Breaker of Armies is going at, because they won't be able to block it. This will draw us a lot of cards, and we can pay 1, 2, 3, 4. And we can swap the Tormented Soul into our hand to get the Arbiter of Woe out. The Arbiter of Woe will draw us a card when it comes out. The Umezawa will allow us to look at these top cards and put one into our hand. So we're going to take the Archfiend of Depravity. And then Satoru sees that one of those creatures entered the battlefield that was not brought in from casting, so it will draw us a card. And then Reconnaissance Mission will see that 1, 2, 3 creatures hit and draw us 3 more cards. Now we have the ability to pick from the cream of the crop of the top cards of our deck. 12 card hand, we can get whatever we need to keep out of here, no problems whatsoever. We can go ahead and pay 2 to get the Slither Blade out, and we can get the Tormented Soul back out. Now we just have to discard 3 cards. And a great thing about discarding 3 cards right now is we have a Coiling Rebirth. So check this out. We get rid of this Dalek Drone, this Archfiend of Depravity, and this Veteran Ice Climber. So that now, when we move into the next turn, we have a Gormon, so we still have some moves that are good to use. We can go ahead and play this River of Tears and tap 1, 2, 3. And we can play, actually 4, nah, just 3. We can play Victimize. Victimize can get rid of this Slither Blade. We do not need it. And it can get us both the Archfiend of Depravity and the Dalek Drone out, which can clear our opponent's board for us to hit with. We can discard cards super easy by just drawing extra cards well above what our hand size can allow for, so that we can use our reanimation spells to get more free things out. With a board state like this, we're kind of in a position of just utter dominance. Our opponents can't kill Umezawa because they have to kill the Breaker of Armies first. And it's hard to kill the Breaker of Armies because he's got a booty of 8, and he's colorless. He dodges a handful of removals. He dodges a lot of red removals. He dodges removals that care about color. There's not a lot of those in the game, but people do run them sometimes. Breaker of Armies is a very powerful card. And we have the Vile Mutilator, so even if they kill all that, we still keep punching somebody in the face for 6. People can be super afraid of Crackback, and we're in a position where we can make them afraid of Crackback. Not to mention, they're losing resources stupidly fast because of the Archfiend of Depravity, so honestly, we're just in a strong spot. If we do our swing right now with everything that can swing, then we're going to swap the Tormentor into our hand, and then we're going to get the Gormon out. This is going to force all of our opponents to sack a creature. And then Umezawa saw it leave. The other Umezawa saw it come in, so we can put the counterspell in our hand. And then 1, 2, 3 creatures punched our opponents. We get to draw 3 cards. So we're back at a healthy hand size, honestly. And I love being able to play a deck that does stuff like this because it is so hard to keep it down. If you're looking to upgrade this deck, then a Silent Hall Creep will go a long way into helping you. Not only is it one of the best creatures that can punch in and do its thing unblockably, but it's got a bunch of extra text like being able to clone itself, or not clone itself, but clone a different creature on the board, which can make it way harder for our opponents to win. And The reason I say that is if you can turn him into a clone of Archon of Cruelty, then you're just off to the races. Archon of Cruelty is such a powerful card, making our opponents lose cards, drawing us cards, burning people. It's great. The draw package can be upgraded with a Grazilex Illithid Scholar, because Grazilex allows us to have access to that bouncing to hand ability that is so helpful. Offer You Can't Refuse is a lower curve counterspell we have access to, and why not go ahead and throw some bigger targets for bouncing your creatures to your hand, like Silent Bladed Oni and Fallen Shinobi that can steal cards from our opponents, the Lord of Change, who can draw a ton of cards while being a flyer, Jin Kataxis, who draws a ton of cards and forces our opponents to lose all their cards, Valgavoth, one of the strongest big black dudes around, and Sheoldred Whispering One, who can reanimate our own powerful cards from our graveyard while being a Swamp Walker, so it's very hard for our opponents to kill or to block her too. Toxic Deluge can do a lot of work in the deck too, because we can use it to get rid of our just the small creatures on the board while keeping our big boys on the board. And if you are upgrading the deck, I almost always recommend getting a Withering Torment if you are running a deck that does not have access to enchantment removal easily, because despite it not being super synergistic with the deck, it does stop us from losing to Omniscience. So always good to have a Withering Torment if you do not have access to one already. And with that said, hopefully you guys enjoyed the deck. Hopefully you enjoyed the bit of like the logic behind the numbers and why they have what they do. Hopefully it answered your questions, and hopefully you had a fun time with it. If you end up building this, let me know. If you have any changes you would make to the deck, let me know. If there's any upgrades that I missed, let me know. And I hope you guys have a wonderful time. I will see you in the next video.